Why did Dr. King's friends stop him from going to therapy? In 1967, there was a schism in the civil rights movement, and not over the violence versus nonviolence that you might be familiar with. When King spoke out against Vietnam in Riverside Church in New York, many of his friends turned their backs on him. I thought my original source for this was the introduction by the ambassador in the book called The Conscience. That's actually incorrect. The place where I learned this was a documentary that I watched in New York called The King in the Wilderness. King's friends are interviewed, and following his speaking out in Vietnam, Dr. King fell into a depression.
The loneliness and what it must have felt like when he was so abandoned by so many and told to stay in your place.
He really felt betrayed. And he said over and over, they don't know me.
They applauded me. I told Negroes to be nonviolent. These same people are damning me when I say you ought to be nonviolent toward little brown children in Vietnam.
The way all of America turned on him when he stepped into the Vietnam drama was perhaps the single most challenging moment for Martin.
So naturally, they were considering psychiatric care at this time. They go into details about it in the documentary, which I recommend that you watch. But what ended up happening is that they decided that was a bad idea. Almost all of King's phone calls were being bugged and monitored by the FBI. It was reasonable for them to assume or deduce that if he went to see a psychiatrist, everything that he said to that psychiatrist would eventually leak. So he suffered through his depression untreated. The documentary does explain that he found his way to a better place mentally before he was assassinated. If that is comforting to you, I think it's important to name that element of the story. My question is, what did he say in his speech beyond Vietnam that was so controversial that he lost so many friends?
And I knew that I could never again raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed in the ghettos without having first spoken clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government.
It wasn't just that he spoke out against the war, but in speaking out against the war, he calls out America for its materialism, its racism, and its militarism, its imperialism. And not just the imperialism of direct military action, but the imperialism of economic investment as a form of extortion and control. He's got many quotes about this.
To maintain social stability for our investments accounts for the counter-revolutionary action of American forces in Guatemala. It tells why American helicopters are being used against guerrillas in Cambodia, and why American napalm and Green Beret forces have already been active against rebels in Peru.
The title of the speech is Beyond Vietnam. It's not one war, but Dr. King calling out the incessant imperialist impulse of America's military.
That the words of the late John F. Kennedy come back to haunt us. 5 years ago, he said, "Those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable." Increasingly by choice or by accident, this is the role our nation has taken, the role of those who make peaceful revolution impossible by refusing to give up the privileges and the pleasures that come from the immense profits of overseas investments. I am convinced that if we are to get on the right side of the world revolution, we as a nation must undergo a radical revolution of values.
A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. America, the richest and most powerful nation in the world, can well lead the way in this revolution of values. There is nothing except a tragic death wish to prevent us from reordering our priorities so that the pursuit of peace will take precedence over the pursuit of war. He says we have to declare a unilateral ceasefire, and then he says that we must make what reparations we can for the damage that we have done. We must provide the medical aid that is badly needed, making it available in this country, if necessary. There's more quotes that I want to read you. There's more context. He was working with Lyndon B. Johnson, and Johnson was an ally working with them on civil rights legislation, and then King had to make the decision to criticize him in public, despite the fact that they had worked together on the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. In case it's not abundantly clear, we need a ceasefire in Gaza. I also, from what I can tell, believe that is what Dr. King would be calling for were he here.
We are called to speak for the weak, for the voiceless, for the victims of our nation, and for those it calls enemy. For no document from human hands can make these humans any less our brothers.